But anyways, I'm Tom LaClaire. I am the Clayton Town/Village Historian. Again, welcome to History at Noon. This program is a partnership with the Thousand Islands Museum, myself as the historian's office. We got the Sesquicentennial Planning Committee, and we also got the Clayton Opera House. So we're all working hand in hand to bring these programs to you. So Larry, as you can see the way he's dressed, he knows a little bit about trains. And when you get done today, you're going to know a little bit more about trains. So with that, Larry, the program is yours.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Now we're going to talk about Clayton by train. Give a little history of how the trains got to Clayton. Not a lot about trains in Clayton itself. There's not a lot of resources out there for that. Tom and I sat at the museum last week pouring through the various books. I probably could have twice as many pictures if I chose to do that, but I did not. So we're going to talk about some of the, as I say, how the trains got here in the first place, and a little bit about what went on after that. So, leading us. A lot of what you're going to see today came out of a book called The History of Rome, Watertown, and Ogdensburg. Edward Hungerford. It was published in 1922. It's available online. Just look that up online, and it's a Gutenberg project presentation. You can read the whole thing. It's quite a few pages. Not that many if you print it out, but the pages were smaller in the book apparently. But nonetheless, it's an excellent resource, although I found some issues with it. I tried to credit images wherever possible. A good number of them came from the Thousand Islands Museum, through some other folks. There's some from my personal collection, and a few that I forgot to get the attributes for when I pulled them offline. But most of them are easily available. They're postcards or whatever. You can buy them. Come down to the train show in Clayton. If there's a postcard dealer, odds are they'll have that postcard. And some other information, Nancy Bond and Rick Caselli both wrote articles for the Thousand Islands Life magazine, and those were both resources and gave me some information for this as well. So credit to them. Now, railroading is fun. It's dangerous, definitely dangerous if you're involved with it, as I am when I'm a conductor, or when I'm the, and I do meet a lot of people, by the way. That was taken at a show in Springfield, but I didn't miss this year because of this. That building, that show is 4 buildings. Has anyone ever been to the Eastern State Exposition in Massachusetts, in West Springfield? It's basically the New England State Fair. So picture 4 buildings at the New York State Fair, including the new one, all full of railroad stuff, model railroads, real railroads, things like hats, whatever. You name it, park is there. So that was taken there. And there I am at the seat of the first RS3 locomotive that the New York Central had, which we believe probably ran up into, I know it ran up into this area as well. We were releasing it at the time, and the owners died. There's some issues with exactly who owns it and stuff like that. So we aren't running that anymore. We have 8255 instead, also in RS3. But yes, I get to ring the bell, I get to blow the horn, I get to pull the throttle and use the brakes, and hopefully give everybody a good ride when we're up there. And yes, that is Thomas the Tank Engine. So you can sell all your little ones that you met the driver for Thomas the Tank Engine. We ran 48 trips over 2 weekends that year, and I was at the throttle in Thomas every time. Now that Thomas is just basically a car. Don't even have a brake in it. But I spent a lot of time in those that radio. I was talking to the engineer and telling him what we could do. And we are on our way to Tupper Lake, finally. We are going all the way to Lake Placid. The trail advocates have successfully gotten Tupper Lake to Lake Placid ripped up. It's gone. But we will be running to Tupper Lake this summer. Not sure exactly when yet. There's lots of work to do. My railroad history, I grew up in southeastern, I was born in Watertown, but grew up in southeastern Michigan, right by the former Pier Marquette. Father Marquette, one of the explorers who explored out in that area. The Pier Marquette Railroad ran from, I'm not sure what it ran through all over Michigan. Actually, the Pier Marquette owned some of the car ferries that ran across Lake Michigan. I used to go to work, go to school in the morning when I was in junior high school, and 3 trains would come through. In 20 minutes or so it took me to walk to school. And by the way, it was uphill both ways. Rain, snow, sleet, and hail. Our junior high school was on top of one hill in the village, which straddles, if you saw those slides I was showing earlier, straddles the Huron River. And we lived on top of the other hill, so it was uphill both ways. All right. I threw in a picture of Pier Marquette 1225 there. And you may not have ever heard of 1225. Probably haven't seen it, I have. Unfortunately, it wasn't under steam when I was out in Michigan for an event there. But it was actually preserved on the campus of Michigan State University. A group of students got together, got it back under steam, and the Steam Railroading Institute now runs it. They just finished up their Christmas trains with it. The significant thing about 1225 is while you may not have heard of it, how many have seen the movie Polar Express? You've heard the locomotive. The producers went to Owasso, Michigan, and recorded sounds from the locomotive that were used in the movie. Now, one thing they realized they hadn't done when they got there, or when they got home back in Hollywood, was they weren't quite sure exactly how to change the headlight. So the folks at SRI videoed changing the headlight on the 1225. It's just a big screw base. But, so when you see the scene in Polar Express where they're changing the headlight, technically it's correct. You won't find them out there at 60 miles an hour changing the headlight, but technically changing the headlight on that locomotive is correct. Milford has like a lot of towns, has a history book, and the title of the history book is 10 Minutes Ahead of the Rest of the World. And that came from a little stunt that some youths had played. They got the clock in the railroad station and moved it ahead 10 minutes. Chaos ensued for several days. People wondering why trains were early, late, why they weren't where they're supposed to be, until they finally figured out that indeed the clock had been changed. They fixed that. But then I said, I digress. I am a rail fan. Most people are at some level, unless you're stuck behind a train or stuck at a crossing of a long train. Starts with a tree. I could have gotten a picture for that, but I didn't. A train under the tree. Thomas for kids of the current generation. We're always glad to see the gates go down. It's like, what's going to go by? What's going to go by? And any sort of rail activity. There are a number of rail cams all over the country, including one in Pulaski. If you cross from Pulaski on Route 13, there's one out in Deschler, Ohio that I actually go to Deschler almost every year. And we watch trains go by. Sit on our computers, watch trains go by. And there are some very avid followers. They actually keep a log of all the trains going through Deschler. There's one at Fairport as well in New York. We often I model the Tug Hill and Northern, which is loosely based on the rural water town of Ogdensburg, but not. And also includes a little bit of Glenfield and Western. And railroad archaeology is fairly fascinating. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So, origins of rail in the North Country. Well, the water town in Rome, first railroad up here. The Rome water town in Ogdensburg, which grew from the water town in Rome. Ellisburg and Sackets Harbor. How many knew there was a railroad ran between Pierpont Manor and Sackets Harbor? As a matter of fact, the station in Sackets Harbor was built for that railroad and used later on for another railroad. The Carthage water town in Sackets Harbor. That was the one. That's who used the station. And if you travel on Route 81, just south of Exit 45, there's a big billboard on the east side of 81, and that billboard is on the right-of-way of the Carthage Watertown and Sackets Harbor. It ran from Watertown to Sackets Harbor and over to Carthage as well. The Carthage and Copenhagen, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And there were a lot of others. There was a rail here in Clayton, the Clayton and Theresa, which I didn't know existed until I started researching, get some depth for this. The Utica and Black River, the Rome Watertown and Ogdensburg, and of course the New York Central. Mid-1800s, there were a lot of railroads built. a lot. Most of them were local efforts. The Great New York Central Water Level Route was 3 or 4 or 5, again, I didn't look up for this, but short railroads, the Schenectady and Utica and Syracuse, and right on down the line. And they were all gathered together in one railroad, and there they went, and grew from there. I mentioned we'll get back to the Clayton 3, so there in a minute, the same thing. And they were often locally funded by subscriptions. You want to see the railroad in your town? Sure, throw in a couple $100 or whatever, buy a share of the railroad, and we can get it built, and away we go. Stock ticket for the Watertown Ogdenburg. Some of the other railroads, the Sackets Harbor and Ellsburg I mentioned, ran from Kermit Manor up through Warville Settlement, Belleville, Smithville, and on to Sackets Harbor. And you can still find a lot of that right away. We'll talk about that a little bit in archaeology here. The Carthage Watertown and Sackets Harbor, which ran clearly from Carthage through Black River, along that line. A lot of that railroad has been obliterated. It used to be a big hill just east of Black River on Route 3, and they took that out, but that was for the overpass for that railroad. And I think my next line is actually incorrect. I don't think they actually planned to extend that one. That was another railroad, but we'll talk about that one as well. The Carthage and Copenhagen was clearly a railroad that was built by the locals for the locals. Didn't last very long, but their station in Copenhagen lasted quite a while. The town took it over, and I think they actually moved it, used it as a town barn. One thing that they used on that railroad, though, was a unique piece of rolling stock called the Mckeen wind splitter. And yes, it's a unique, I think there's probably some marine influence there with the pointed prow, and the rear end was round, very much like ships. So there weren't a lot of examples, and I don't think there's any. There may still be a couple of them around, but that was one like that. That was the one that ran there. So there was a self-propelled car, and that got you from point A to point B. And you may have been at the Sackets Harbor Station. It's now the Route Club. So, some railroads were planned, and we'll see this one on the maps a little later on. The Sackets Harbor and Saratoga. They're right across the middle of the Adirondacks, and down to Saratoga. Those folks and the folks who built the Northern Railroad, we'll talk about that as well, had an eye on not New York City, but Boston for trade with the North Country. The Sackets Harbor and Saratoga never happened. Northern did, we'll talk about that. And there may have been bits and pieces, but it wasn't there. The Ogdenburg, Clayton, and Rome built to compete with the Utica and Black River, which we'll talk about a little more depth in a little bit. They had an interesting concept, and that was to do their entire grading, their entire road bed before they laid any rail. Well, logistically, that's kind of a problem because you can't haul stuff up to work on the railroad unless you got a railroad to haul it on. So one thing that they did build, though, is near Houseville. I think it's on the East Road. East Road or Glen, yes, it's near Houseville, nonetheless. They did a 1,200-foot long cut, 20 feet deep, which is still visible if you know where you're looking for it. And that was later used by the Field and Western, a logging railroad that ran out onto Tug Hill. There were some issues with that, with snow, and we'll talk a little bit about snow later on, and I'll mention that again. The Northern Railroad, in its last iteration, it was known as it was part of the Rutland Railroad, ran across the northern part of the state, through Moira and over to Ogdensburg, across Lake Champlain at the northern end. That was part of the whole idea to get traffic from the Boston area over this way. Now, Ogdensburg was significant because that was the end of navigable waters at the time from the Great Lakes. After that, you ran into the rapids, and only the strong survived in the rapids. So there was traffic for the lakes. They could make it up and down the river, okay, from Ogdensburg down to Lake Ontario, and points beyond once they get the the canal built at Welland. And say it ended at Ogdensburg, parts of it are still in existence, but most of it's gone. You can still see the bridge pilings on Lake Champlain. So let's talk about the water town in Rome. First railroad into this part of the North Country. Came up with the idea in 1835, early in the railroad boom idea. They started building it in 1848. Had to raise the money, had to get everything together, get all the people to sign off on everything. It was completed at Cape Vincent in April 1852. There we go. Read my own, whatever it is. They actually built that fairly quickly compared to what we're going to see with the Utica and Black River. Ran through Rome, through Camden, up to Richland, and then up to Watertown, and Watertown over to Cape Vincent. And you can easily find most of that if you drive down Route 13. You'll cross that several times, and you can see where the road bed was in a number of places. From Rome to Richland, that was abandoned in stages. Back to Camden, and then back down from there. And there's still a little bit in Rome, but not much. Camden had handled was the wire factory there. But that's all. Everything's gone truck now. The line from Richland to Watertown is still very much in use. And that connected with I didn't put the Syracuse and Northern in here, but when the Syracuse and Northern was built out of Syracuse, that connected to this line at Pulaski and Richland, and that's how the trains get to the North Country now. And the line from the right of way from Watertown to Cape Vincent, you can still pick most of that out. It's actually being used by DANE, Development Authority of North Country, for a water line now, for the most part. And many of the fills and the bridges are still very, very visible, especially in Chenal and Brownville. And in Brownville is supposedly the only cemetery in the entire country that has a railroad, or had a railroad running through it. That's why there's a big gap in the cemetery if you go to the Brownville Cemetery. The last place that the rails came up was that served the LP gas plant there in Glen Park. That's all been straight railed now, and they just go straight on through. Well, there's the first Cape Vincent station, and did just fine until it blew down in the gale of 1895. Apparently that was quite the storm. Unfortunately, there were people at the station and several lost their lives. They just that was facing toward the lake, of course the wind was probably coming off the lake, and they just completely blew the station away. So, but you can see the station that replaced it even now. It's in the marina down there in Cape Vincent. And that was an international gateway. That was the first place that the rails reached this part of the country and the water. A lot of ships, even though Cape Vincent didn't have their breakwater yet, still a lot of ships came in there for trade. A lot of grain moved, probably some coal. And I mentioned the steamer that laded the lake, and that was a big thing on the river. And the lake was the steamers that ran back and forth. The Lady Lake ran between Cape Vincent and Clayton, or Kingston rather. And according to one of the things I read, they had staterooms on the upper level, which is unusual for the steamers in this area. All right, going north from Watertown. We've gotten to Watertown with Rome to Watertown. Going north, they started come north, the Potsdam and Watertown, or Potsdam Railroad. They wanted a connection to the world. They connected to the Northern Railroad at Potsdam Junction, which we now know as Norwood. And that's part of the railroad that still exists from that line because it runs from Norwood over to Ogdensburg. It's still active. The Potsdam and Watertown, local funding, as I mentioned before. These were folks who knew what they had, and they wanted to take advantage of it. The resources in the North Country had not been tapped. If you wanted to get your milk products out, your cheese or whatever, it went by wagon. That was the only way to get it out. Butter and everything else all had to go by wagon. Anything you had to bring in had to come in by wagon. Once the Rome to Watertown was finished, you could come at least as far as Watertown, but then you were stuck. And the control by the Watertown and Rome, yes, that happened in 1860. And at that time, it became the Rome, Watertown, and Ogdensburg, which was in industry for many, many years. Let's move over to the Utica and Black River Railroad. As I suggested, it started in Utica. This is something of a competition for the Rome Water Town in Ogdensburg. They first started that in 1853. It took them until 1857 to finally get tracks to Boonville. And then things kind of lagged. They didn't run too much. They were running 2 trains a day, one north, one south. They doubled that after several years, so they were running 2 trains a day, passenger trains. And of course, any freight that they handled. They reorganized it in 1860 as the Utica and Black River, which it was known as until its demise. Finally, in 1868, they got to Lowville. Took them 4 years to get from Lowville to Carthage. Then it only took them a year to get from Carthage all the way over to Clayton. But they had help with that. And that's where the whole story comes from. The Clayton and Theresa, as I said, I didn't know this railroad existed until I found it in my research. And it was built by some local folks, again, who wanted a connection to the world. And they built the road from Clayton to Theresa. I'm pretty sure it connected at Rivergate, or as in the trail. Well, that's just south of Theresa. Can't read my own slides here. There we go. They never ran their own trains, as you'll see in a moment. Operation fell to the Utica and Black River, which leased it. So they built the tracks, but they never ran their own train. You won't find a ticket for the Clayton and Theresa Railroad or anything else. You won't find any pictures of cars or whatever. 1886, they were gone, taken over completely by the Utica and Black River. And as I said, Huck River's book never mentions the Clayton and Theresa, which is surprising, because that was pretty much, that's the authoritative tome on railroads in the North Country, and he doesn't even know it's there. A friend of mine works in railroad legal, lives out in Denver, Colorado, and he pointed me to a resource, Hoare's Manual of Railroads. And this is the 1880 edition, and lo and behold, there's the Clayton and Theresa. And when you look at rolling stock, you'll notice it says none owned. So they never actually ran a train of their own. Feeding rail. In Ogdensburg, Clayton, and Rome, I mentioned that before. Again, it was a competition for the Utica and Black River, supposed to be. They were going to build up on the hill. Utica and Black River built up the Black River Valley, very nice alignment there, and nice low levels, easy grades, and everything else. Ogdensburg, Clayton, and Rome was going to go a little higher. They actually, as I said, they passed near Houseville, or were going to pass near Houseville, and probably around Martinsburg, and then into Lowville from there. Not a lot more grades going on there, and it wasn't pretty. And because their logistical plan wasn't exactly the best, I just imagine, let's grade the entire road from here to someplace else, and then we'll pave it later on. You pave it as you go. But you still find evidence in the line. There are several culverts. Russ Nelson, abandoned railroads is his thing, and he's found several culverts from that railroad that were built before they were when they were grading the line. And I mentioned that big cut near Houseville in Lewis County. And of course, it all went over to the New York Central and Hudson River, later just the New York Central Railroad. The Rome Water Town line took over the Utica and Black River on April 16, 1886, and they were now providing service to the North Country via 2 different routes. New York Central took over the Rome Water Town in Ogdensburg in 1891, 5 years later. And from there, as they say, the rest is history. But passenger service, nearly system-wide, was gone by 1965. Still some mainline trains running until the Penn Central debacle in 1968. Last freight train in Clayton ran in 1972. At that time, I'm not sure what they were picking up, unless they were picking up rails, because there wasn't a whole lot left in Clayton in 1972 to serve as industry. I wasn't living here at the time, but if somebody's got other information, let me know. Windgrass. Okay.
Cars at once upon a time come in,
Yeah.
but later here didn't.
Actually, you mentioned windgrass, and to jump ahead in some railroad archaeology, If you look at the windgrass, at the lumber sheds, some of the beams underneath some of the lumber sheds are rails.
And then the same way, I think with Brooks's was on the outside of town, they would send trucks over to each.
Very possibly, yeah. We'll see maps of what it looked like here shortly, in Clayton. There was a lot of track over in that corner of town and a number of sightings, so. So, that's not very easy to see, but that's New York State and the railroads they're in 1855. A little closer look at it. And you can see, I mentioned the Sackett's Harbor and Ellsworth, that's there. You can see the lines going north. And the line of Clayton, was it there yet? No, it wasn't. But that was pretty sparse, and you can see Tug Hill down there at the bottom. Here's an 1861 image. And this one now, you can see the blue line there going across the Adirondacks. That was the Sackett's Harbor in Saratoga. So that was where it was supposed to be. Rather interesting route. It's actually going to pass near Old Forge on the way across. But, it'd be interesting to see if that had been built. What would be the case now? That was before the blue line for the Adirondack Park, so they wouldn't have any trouble building it.
So Larry, I guess that, Cape Vincent had a train before Clayton?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the original terminus of the Roman Watertown. The Roman Watertown didn't end at Watertown, it ended at Cape Vincent. So I have to go back through the slides, but yeah, that was what, 1853 or so there that Cape Vincent had the railroad. And again, that was the first place they could find that would get, that they gave them an easy route for one thing, to get to the river and the lake. Coming up to Clayton was a little more problematic. You look at the route, if you look at, just draw a line across between Clayton and Watertown, and there's some interesting profiles in there.
Larry, I'm a caretaker for a family out in the islands, and they own one of the train cars that would be their personal car.
Yep.
And I try to pick their brain all that I can. And the big thing they said when they came up, they'd have to change engines in Philadelphia before they came to Clayton, and I never quite figured out if it was a different tracks or they need to step down to a smaller engine.
Probably a smaller engine. Without digging into some files that I don't have access to, odds are that was, some portion of that was built with much lighter rail. Rail is measured by how many pounds it weighs per yard. So 3 feet of track, some of the, I think, well, we went back and looked at that, it said how much the Clayton Theresa was, and that was like 50 pounds. Mainline tracks out there today, you know, the Syracuse and Washington trains come through, they're on 132 pound rail. So it's much more substantial rail. A lot of early railroads were built, and they're also built with rail that may not have been as metallurgically sound. It was cast iron rail and stuff like that. So odds are that was the problem, was they just, in Philadelphia, from Philadelphia over, and it may have not even just been Philadelphia, it may have been from Theresa over, from Rivergate over, may have been the problem. Yeah, but it was easier to change locomotives at Philadelphia than it was at Rivergate, because there's no place at Rivergate to do it, there's just a switch there.
And then once one time, wasn't there like 14 or 16 trains a day came into Clayton?
We'll talk about that.
Oh,
Yeah. So there's the North Country in 1861. All right, there were stations, obviously. Anybody around long enough to recognize this one, aside from pictures? Absolutely. Right behind the hotel. And if you've seen pictures of the interior, that was a gorgeous building, a really gorgeous building. Trains from the north and the east came through here. I saw an article about some college students that were talking about their trip through Watertown on their way to wherever they were going. And let's see, there's no track there left anymore. That's the J.B. Weiss parking lot. Belleville had 2 stations. The curved or the flatter roof one was the New York Central Station, as I understand it. The other one was for the Loudville and Beaver River, which ran up to Krogan. And that track's still in place. That was to serve, basically to serve the paper mills. Why that railroad existed in the first place. We're trying to revive that. It's a nonprofit group trying to do things, but some of the crossings have even been paved over up there, so they've got that full battle. They still have the old Shea up there, which is just, it's recently run out of its certification, so they can't fire it up anymore. And I think they'd like to get that going, but refurbing a steam locomotive like that takes a lot of time, a lot of money. Probably more than the locomotive cost even in today's dollars. Carthage, which I believe is now gone. That was a busy place. Several railroads working through there, because from Carthage you could leave and go straight to Watertown, you can go up to Philly and go north. The Black River came in there, eventually New York Central. You see there was quite the station grounds, and they kept it up very nicely. It was a busy place. There's Philadelphia, crossroads of the road Watertown and Ogdenburg, and Utica and Black River, and eventually just the road Watertown and Ogdenburg, and eventually New York Central. Now there's still a junction there, and that track goes down, does go down to Carthage, and the Fort Drum is served off the line at Kelsey. And there's still some business down that way. Not a lot, mostly slack chemical. I think there's a paper company still getting stuff down there. Little story about that I found in reading about this was that occasionally around Watertown and Augsburg block the diamond. That's a place where two tracks cross. And well, that's too bad there. You can Black River, your train can't get through. We own the crossing because we were here first. And I can remember hearing references in Philadelphia, because there were actually at least 3 Y tracks there, transfer tracks, to go from the north-south to the east-west. And one of them on the southwest corner was known as the Clayton Y, even though it didn't even come close to going to Clayton anymore. That track's no longer there. Theresa, the station was just off the Lamarville Road. That's obviously no longer there either. But you wouldn't have gone through there unless you're coming from up north. You'd have to go to Philadelphia, change trains, and go to Clayton. Even today, if you look at the trail, you can see that there was a Y that split at Rivergate, and one track came over to Clayton, and one track went north up through Theresa, Redwood, and so on. And there was no way to get from Theresa to Clayton except for going to Philly and then coming back. Fargo, most of you have seen that building. I don't know if you've ever been in it. I actually have a document, I couldn't find it to scan it. It was a shipping document for household goods for the Reverend at one of the churches in DePaulville. Probably the Methodists, I think they're the ones that had the parsonage there. The Dickies live now. Coming from, I believe, Sandy Creek. So it's the middle of the shipping document for household goods going from Sandy Creek to Fargo. So we had to bring my wagon over to DePaulville. There it was. So we talked about getting your products out. First shipment of cheese and butter from Lafargeville in 1873. So I'm sure the farmers were very happy. They had another market for their produce, hay, and everything else, and supplies coming in as well. You name it, it went by rail. Matter of fact, you'll notice behind the station there in Lafargeville, a New York, New Haven, and Hartford railroad car. So it came in from someplace, probably from down in that area. And there we are, we're in Clayton. Most people have seen this picture. There's more versions of this out there from different sources. And this one's from South Isles Museum, but as I say, they're everywhere. They're black and white, they're colored, the whole thing. And it does show how busy the station was, and emphasizes the fact that people could step off the train and get on the steamers. That way they did. Obviously, the train has just come in. They're trying to load up the steamers. Anybody want any popcorn? See the little guy down there with the box in front of him? That box says popcorn. had to blow that up a little. It's like, really? Absolutely. Drummer out there getting, trying to sell some popcorn. A little view probably from the coal dock of a couple of the boats with steamers in. And I found this picture fascinating because notice the news kiosk. And what do we have in Frank Park now? It's not a news kiosk, but there's a kiosk in Frank Park. So I found that interesting, to say the least. This picture may have been somewhat created. These folks that made these postcards and stuff were very fond of gluing stuff into their pictures. You see an airplane in the picture that, well, there was no airplane flying at that point in time, they just stuck it in the picture. Or they would take a station and splice that station together with a crowd. So it looks like there's a huge crowd at the station, and really it's two completely, if you look real carefully, you can see where they did it. Back then they didn't have Photoshop, so they had to cut images and cut negatives and everything else. And 1920, guy in his nice straw hat there. And at that time, especially if you're riding the club cars, the Pullman cars, either the sleepers or the parlor cars, you rode in style. You didn't see people riding in their blue jeans. If you did, they were probably a farmer going from point A to point B. If you were traveling, especially if you're coming up to where a lot of these folks were going, they were dressed for the occasion. And there's Frank Cole, and remember that dog in the last slide? I don't know if that's the same one or not, but I'm guessing maybe it was. Maybe a station mascot. And that image looks familiar. Steamer America, and again, as the poster shows, and as you can see here, folks getting right straight off the train and onto the steamer. Well, here was the layout, some valuation maps of the area, and you can see where the station was down here in the kind of the lower right corner. You see the Consul Hall coal dock there. Freight station over a little further. So it helps get you oriented to where everything was, and the station was actually right at the foot of Webb Street. So we're not too far off with the pavilion, pretty much almost where the station was, although the station was probably a little closer to Riverside Drive. What is now Riverside Drive was Water Street. But nonetheless, there was a lot of track there, a lot of trains coming in. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit. And a hotel, see where Franklin Street is. This image doesn't show anything from Frank's, but that other one I had does. And a little further back, there's Mary Street, there's the turntable. Turntable right about where the sewage plant is. Curiously, round structure, real close to each other there. And how many have heard of, actually, I can't read it. Gardner Street. I want to turn Gardner Street. Well, now we know it as the island, not the island. Washington Island Road. But there you go, and you can see that, yes, there was a siding right about where Wheatgrass is. It was. Auto ramp, must be they brought cars in here, probably by boxcar, which is how they were shipped in the early days, and unloaded them there. So if you bought a car back then that came in by train, it made a trip down that ramp.
There's pictures around Clayton where they show a whole line of Model A's or T's hooked together, where they hook them all together over there and then tow them all over, Clayton all hooked together.
Yep. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. It wasn't something I was looking for, so I wouldn't have found it. But there you go.
See the lineup, that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, then, there's your color that goes along with, it's a little bit of the map here, but it just shows you, exactly how involved the railroad was with all this stuff. And the lessees there, who own some of those properties there, they're marked. And here's a slightly different map. Shows much of the same stuff though. You see where Franklin Street would have been. It came all the way down to the rail yard. And again, the station was right at Webb Street. And now we're showing the Frank Snowplow. So I don't know if I have a year on this particular scan. This one came from the museum. So why'd they come to Clayton? Well, we all know why they came to Clayton, but New York Central was big on getting people to Clayton. Everybody that bought a ticket was income. One of the steamers, I didn't read the name on it. They actually worked with the Folger system. I read about it. I didn't get deeply into the Folger system, but there was apparently a system of old lines. But they all worked together. That actually was probably the Rapids. And talk about schedules. Here's 1906. This was the first class stuff. This was the sleeping cars and the parlor cars. And you can see you can leave New York City at 7:16 p.m., Grand Central Station, and arrive in Clayton the next morning at 6:28 a.m. After a refreshing night's sleep on the way out. The car would change, very possibly change trains in Utica, and then come up the line from there. Next one, Grand Central at 7:45 a.m. and get in at 6:10 p.m. So come up here and up. You'd be here in time for dinner. Get on the steamer, go out and live a late supper dinner. And other examples there as well. Southbound leaving Clayton, you can leave Clayton at 6:40 p.m. I think that says, and you'd arrive at Grand Central at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's just a time to do some business. And that was an important factor, by the way. A lot of folks would come up, businessmen would come up, spend the weekend up here, possibly with their families, and then now they'd be back in New York City in time for their day's business. And this was the club train. This was a 1908 picture, so right along the lines of that schedule I just showed you. And the club train was the, I'm quite certain, I haven't found that reference for sure, but that was the train with the sleepers, the parlor cars. So you travel north on the club train. You go up here, spin the locomotive, and work on sending it back. There's some general schedules. A little hard to read, but nonetheless, every yellow line is where Clayton's mentioned. Same thing here. And same thing here from 1906. Actually, this is scans from a schedule, a timetable that I have on collection. 20 trains a day, well, maybe not quite, but in 1873, 8 arrivals, 11 departures. I think I have that timetable. I couldn't find it. Very similar in 1806. And you can check Niagara Falls and find a train that was headed for Clayton. Part of the problem with that was that I started having to look at times. I had to list times for arrivals and departures in Clayton, because even though there was a train coming from New York City and one coming from Utica and one from Syracuse and one from they were all arriving in Clayton at the same time, so they were all a collection of the same cars. So it's just one train as opposed to 4 or 5. The prime reason to take the train? Well, the river and the lake to a certain extent. And this is not a railroad schedule. You look at some of the stations on there, that's all steamer stops on the river. If you wanted to go to Alex Bay and stay in Alex Bay, you come to Clayton, get off the train, take the steamer to Alex Bay, and away you go. Of course, they stop at the various hotels and stuff as well. 1914, this was actually an excursion schedule. They ran it just like Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. But to give you an idea what kind of times they were running, you left Syracuse at 8:15 in the morning. Let's see. Clayton about 11 o'clock. Didn't have much time to spend. We took this up here, but you can do the Island Ramble while you were there. And you can just about run this ad today for the cruise lines. But this was from 1908. So business on the river hasn't changed an awful lot in all that time. Where were they headed? Long Island, Frontenac, Murray Hill on Murray Isle, the Hub House. interesting reading about the Hub House was that they were wet. They were serving alcohol. Thousand Islands Park, which wasn't very far away, was dry. So the ferry running between Thousand Islands Park and the Hub was a busy place to be. Eventually, the Thousand Islands Park people decided to stop supporting that ferry, but the guy that owned the ferry also owned the Hub House. So the ferry kept running and just didn't go to Thousand Islands Park. Pullman House. How many know that Pullman Island was once a part of Grinnell Island? It washed out, made a new island out of one, 2 islands out of one. Somebody bought Pullman and they built that place. 85 by 50, had surrounding porches on 2 stories. And the hotels on the river would be another presentation. Of course, they came to Clayton too. Here we go to the Hubbard House, right downtown. So, and I'm sure that there were other places they could stay. River guides, you want to come up fishing. I'm sure that was an industry that was very popular. You get off the train with your fishing gear, or maybe just you and your guide can provide everything. You can go out there on the river and see if you can catch some of the big game fish on the river that we know are still out there. Well, this is the New York Central system in 1906, at least the northern part of it. We're not going to worry about the city. You can see that there was a lot of railroad. The line I run on, taken off up there on the right-hand side. The line from Carthage up to Benton Falls is still there. Unfortunately, they spent several $1 million rehabbing that, and then they sold all the paper equipment from Newton Falls. So there's zero industry up there now. They haven't talked about bringing tailings out of there, but I don't know how far that's gotten. I know some of the people that were involved. I know the folks who wrote the Mohawk and Adirondack Northern. Mohawk, Adirondack and Northern, there we go. So there gives you an idea. You can see the line going to Sackett's Harbor, you see the line going to Cape, you see the line coming over to Clayton, and on up to Ogdensburg. Now the line you see right along the lake was actually part of the Rome Water Commons Ogdensburg, frequently referred to as a Hojack. That ran all the way over the lake to Niagara Falls. At Rochester, there was a big swing bridge at Charlotte, and that's been taken out now too. Not much left of that line. Not much left at all. As a matter of fact, if you go to Pulaski, you can see where it took off at the crossing, and you come up Route 3. It's gone. Well, in Clayton, in 1954, and again 1963 just confirms that, passenger service was gone. It was listed for freight only, and as you see, you bottom of the mileposts on the 1954 timetable. These are from, again, my collection of employee timetables, and they didn't include the passenger trains, but there just weren't any. I think you still, in 1954, you could still go to regular by train, but you couldn't come and play. This is how you got to regular by train. This is not the one that actually ran there. This came from Michigan Railroad site. There's an RDC. The New York Central Beeliners. The Bud Company built what they called rail diesel cars, the RDCs, and that served as passenger service on many lines for the New York Central before they were finally able to get rid of the service entirely. And they did run the main line up to through Camp Potsdam as well. Now, something you might notice about this, any rail fans in here, notice there's 2 doors there on the front. I don't remember which model of RDC this is. There were specific models, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the second door was a baggage door. So if you're going to check baggage, that's where your suitcase went. The front door was for the railway post office. And that little thing hanging off the side there was so they could pick up mail on the fly as they passed through a town. They hung up on a special hook. They'd hook that, pick it up, sort the mail, and usually if there was mail for that place, they'd kick a bag out the door at the same time. Most of the folks would be up there digging through snow through mail bag.
Did those tow another car, or?
They could. And they could also work together. You could put 2 or 3 of them together. They had 2 diesel locomotives, 2 diesel engines in them. That's what the cooling apparatus up on top is. And they were actually diesel hydraulics. the wheels were directly driven through transmission, as opposed to the diesel electrics we see today where it's all electric motor and a big diesel generator. What did I put next? Oh, there we go. The last passenger service on a branch line, not on the main line, on a one-level route, on a branch line, was actually on the Adirondack, which I run in 1965. Last time you could take a train someplace besides the main line. And steam was gone too. This was actually a picture of locomotive that served Clayton. This is an Alco. Alco was built in Schenectady, which is one of the reasons why the New York Central was so big on it. The RS2, the locomotive you saw me in earlier was an RS3, 1,500 horsepower. And actually 8200 was a class locomotive for that. That was the first locomotive of that model in the New York Central block. It ran right here to Clayton. You know, looks like it had an empty coal operator line. I'm not sure where that picture was taken, but it's a Bill Bender picture, so it's probably around here someplace. It may very well have been right here in Clayton. As I said, the last train in Clayton was 1972. And there's a picture at the museum of that train, but it's a locomotive like this one was hauled on. Alco, I think it's an RS11. Well, we wouldn't be talking about the North Country, we weren't talking about snow. I have a lot about snow, but I had a little bit. 1940, March, the end of March, I believe the date was the 28th, they buried a snowplow, derailed it, between Clayton and LaFargeville. And this is part of the Les Corbin collection. Actually, there's another picture which I didn't use, that actually shows Les in the picture. And they're digging it out. Literally, they're digging it out by hand. They didn't have big rotary snow plows. They had to go as far as they could with the plow, back up, try it again. If it was packed too hard, they were in there with whatever tools they had to use, shovels and probably picks and axes and everything else. Get the snow out of there, shovel it out of the way, then they back up, try it again. And March, that would have been good packy snow. So I'm sure that when they came to a stop, it was like concrete trial, wasn't going to go anywhere. Go back a few years, there's a little Watertown Ogdensburg 440 American type locomotive with a snowplow in front of it. I don't know what the location is on this, but clearly very likely would have been used along this line as well. Everybody's posing for the picture. And the 440s, that type of 440 fell out of use pretty much by the turn of the century. At the 1900s, plenty of land. A few items of interest here. I'll give you that time. But perfect. All right, here's a ticket for, this is from Watertown to Niagara Falls for a special excursion for the Pan American Exposition 1901. And one thing that's curious about this one, or interesting about this one, is you'll notice about 3 different ticket punch styles. And that's because each conductor had his own ticket punch. And I have mine, and mine is like no other punch on our railroad and probably in the country. The red tickets, I believe, were probably for if you got on at a flag stop, the conductor sold you a ticket. That's probably what he gave you. And that would mark how much you paid, where it was, and everything else, and keep it the same. The one at the bottom is interesting because somebody made a trip between Clayton and LaFargeville, and I can't tell which way they were going. On March 4th, 1899, the fare between Clayton and LaFargeville was 22 cents.
Were the punches unique to a conductor or to a line?
Conductor. I've got something I use for train shows is a thing that has a printout of just hundreds of different punch styles. You know, I've had this one since I was in 5th grade. I used it on my paper route. Hated it then because I had to squeeze it. But yeah, I have several of our folks have got punches on the railroad on the Adirondack, and all of our punches are different. I can show you mine. If you have a program, I can punch your program for you. You see what they're like. Other stuff that went on here, This is in the rail yard, Clayton. I don't recognize the buildings in the background, maybe somebody else does. But they were having a horse sale. Very likely those horses came in by rail. And I'm sure all the local farmers showed up to get a horse if they needed one. Going through and, looking a horse in the mouth, making sure it's what you want it to be, checking the hooves and everything else. So there it was. And I don't have a date on it. Talk about railroad archaeology, I won't be too long with this, but there's lots of signs of railroads around. You just have to know where to look for them, know what to look for, and have an idea what was going on. Tree lines, cuts, fills, buildings. Anybody remember this? Okay. This was shortly before I moved up here, so I don't remember this. Yeah, it was there, and nowadays you drive through there and never know it even existed. You can kind of tell, you see the fill behind lines field, and you can kind of tell that there was something there, but unless you know what you're looking for, where you go. And the hidden railroad landings, the fill behind lines field. A lot of people don't realize why that hill is back. The tree line east of LaVargel on Route 411, where this line crossed coming in. If you know what you're looking for, you can see where it comes across. Pearl Street Road between Fort Hill and Watertown, you can see where the line that ran from Watertown over to Calcium crossed. You get no other evidence aside from the tree line. The road bed of the Carthage Watertown Sackets Harbor, the billboard just south of exit 45 on the east side. That's on the road bed of that railroad, and that ran from basically the yard over to Sackets Harbor area. And you run down Route 12 or Route 12E between Cape Vincent and Watertown, you'll see all the fills, cuts, bridges. A lot of the stuff is still quite visible. Many of it was used not that long ago. And you can, if you go through Redwood, you can find portions of that.
Right by the post office, you
Yep.
can see, I live there.
Sure. And that's the kind of thing that, you see, why is that like that? Well, that's why it is. Of course, it's a little easier in some cases with the Sissy Danforth Trail being on top of the road that makes it a little easier to pick that out a little bit in some cases. But nonetheless, the stuff is there. I went down to the in town of Ellisburg a few years ago and looked up the Sackets Harbor in Ellisburg for some of the evidence of that. My mother's side of the family is from that area. So I was looking for road bed and stuff like that, and actually I haven't found the landowner to go back into it, but just outside Belleville, there's a big rock cut. You can't see it from the road, but it's there. And in many cases, you can see old bridge abutments. So why is that there? And that's why. So we have built a monument to the railroad. And as I said, it's very close to where the station was. It's probably this way over there. And we can't forget the trestle. And a big news item in this area. That was an earlier drone shot that I did not take. But we found it at the museum there in the collection. I didn't credit that, there it was. And they've now fixed that up so you can get across that bridge. I believe if it's finished yet or not, but they're working on it.